Okay, who's going to be the first question? Okay, Pat.
My name's... Can people hear me?
Yeah.
My name's Pat Ranald, and I'm from the Fair Trade Network. And of course, we've been campaigning for 7 years against the TPP, which is the only bright spot on the Trump horizon. But I should say that what put it on the map politically in the US was the years of community campaigning, and in fact the fact that Bernie Sanders made it a mass issue in his campaign. That's how it got onto the political agenda. So we take some credit for that fact. But what I wanted to say was that to ask about was the implications internationally for Trump's agenda, because although I'm glad that he's sunk the TPP, I do think that his approach on trade and international issues is similar to Pauline Hanson and going to be destructive, including possible trade wars with China and others. And what we really need is a different alternative perspective on what fair trade relationships and a more just economy means. So I'd just like you to comment on those.
Sure. Do we want to do it one at a time? Or not?
If that's, I think that's a better way.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, yes, the campaign against the TPP and other such instruments, came from the left and has been a major campaign for a long time. And Trump, in part, saw that sort of disaffection and jumped on it. But there's also, it was also part of the fact that there's a war within the right in America at the moment between a nationalist right and a free trade right. And Trump's victory, first in the Republican primaries and then as a president, was a victory for the nationalist right, who regard free trade economics and the particular American, idea of fusing free trade economics with freedom as ideology and crap. So Steve Bannon, this guy who really is running the Trump presidency, is an old-fashioned right-wing nationalist, edging on fascist sort of guy who wants to put in $1 trillion infrastructure program. Steve Bannon wants to run the infrastructure program that Obama wanted Congress to fund, where you have an infrastructure bank that would retool America, and it wouldn't be green in the way that Obama's would be, but it may well be a massive reinvestment in America. And you may well see a lot of, people actually getting jobs and bridges being built and things like that. And there will be a lot of joy in the heartland about that. And yes, the other thing that Trump argues is that China and others are gaming the system, the global system with currency, by keeping their currencies devalued, that America has kept its currency high, and that it will retaliate in various ways against that, and the world is forming into these national blocks. I'm not an economist, so I don't know what the effect of that sort of thing will be. I mean, there's all sorts of obvious, negative effects in terms of higher prices. I mean, just in terms of thinking about the American voter and that sort of thing, higher prices for American voters, reduced opportunities in the developing world and that sort of thing. But it would seem that at the moment, the choice you're talking about, the fair trade idea, is not on the agenda because of this sort of class culture split that I'm talking about, whereby large sections of the Democrats are still willing to go to a liberal, globalist, etc. idea, and in the last analysis come down on the side of so-called free trade, TPP sort of arrangements, and that sort of thing, which they then say they will use the state to compensate any losers on that, but that doesn't happen. So that's part of the political dilemma at the moment, I think. How does one work out a global trading system that is both fair and not beholden to that sort of takeover?
And the next question?
Thanks, Guy. Mike Banks from Jacobin.
Hi, Mike.
Nice to see you in person. The other bolt from the blue last year was, Bernie Sanders and the demonstration that there was actually a real large constituency for the left in America, and which was as big a surprise to the left as anybody else. And it seems to me like the left is got a lot of its self-confidence back that it hasn't had, at least in my memory. So I'm just wondering what you think are the prospects for that, and also what you think they should do to connect and to broaden that base.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of culture and politics. I was, as enthused as anybody by the Sanders insurgency and the rise of that. I was more sceptical of the idea that had he won the nomination, he could have won the presidency. I think there remain deep resistances to the idea of even social democracy in America, and that includes at the moment among the working and middle classes. I mean, as you know, and as people probably know, some people know here, that there is a real interesting split in a whole lot of these things. A few years ago, a woman, Kashima Swante, I think it's the name, got elected to the Seattle City Council as a socialist, and she immediately proposed a $15 minimum wage, and everybody said she was crazy, and she got the campaign got going, and the Democrats suddenly realised they had to get on side with it, and so Seattle created a $15 minimum wage, and that ricocheted around the country with minimum wage campaigns popping up and winning everywhere. And the interesting thing was they won in Republican states. They won in states that voted Republicans simultaneously. And that goes to the very wage and work-based sort of culture of America. There was another story recently in the Times about the attempts in Ohio, of all places, a state which has been run by Kasich for a while, a Republican, to get people to use subsidised childcare. The subsidised childcare is there, it's available to them. Many of them are driven crazy by the squeeze on them in getting to jobs and that sort of thing. But they won't take up subsidised childcare because even though it's being offered by a Republican administration, they still feel like it's a handout. It's a government thing. And at the moment, it seems that resistance to the notion of government is very, very strong. Is very, very strong among those classes, and that's part of the nostalgic appeal of Trump, that he is selling the vision of a return to Keynesian capitalism. This idea where the actions of the state, the role of the state in capitalism are kind of obscured a bit, and you think that it's free enterprise and a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and you earn what you get and the high wages for the work going in and that sort of thing. And that's the fantasy he's played to in terms of his hymns to reindustrialisation, that sort of thing. So it seems to me that in the short term it's going to be a cultural battle. It's going to be working out how do we talk about social democracy and what is one aiming for in the 21st century in the relationship between the state and socialism or social democracy, or even the social market, a social market society, whatever we're sort of settling for.
Next question, please. Your name. Your name?
I'm James Evans. I was impressed when you were going to talk about what's happening in America and the world, but I just asked a bit about the world bit. It'd be really good if you can say what's going to happen for the South Pacific and Australia under the Trump administration.
Good luck.
Well, I mean, the difficult thing to work out with the whole Trump gang is this mixture of America firstism, projection of power, old-fashioned projection of power, and isolationism, and possible deep and corrupt involvement with Russia. It's this sort of four-way thing. Trump gave out completely contradictory sort of messages throughout his campaign. On the one hand, we shouldn't be getting involved in all these wars and nation building and that sort of thing. And he was basically sheeting home the nation building that the Bush administration tried to do back to Obama and the Democrats, and constructing that as a sort of form of liberal imperialism, which in a way it was had been done by the Republicans, and thus appealing to that sort of isolationist strand that Ron Paul had appealed to in 2008 and 2012. And then on the other hand, he would say, well, we've got to go in and win. We've got to go in and kill them all. And he's talked about, using nuclear weapons. If we've got them, why don't we use them? And we saw today that he talked about, and it's sort of a glimpse of this, talked about sending troops into Mexico or something like that. I mean, this is sort of it is. Yeah, once again, it's very hard to read, and I'm just not enough of a specialist in what's going on, but I also suspect nobody really knows what's going on because there are contradictory forces within the Trump camp. One thing that seems to be going on is that there's sorts of forms of alliances going on between regimes that are basically traditional conservative and very strongly white and European. And that's part of the weird process whereby the American right and right-wing voters were made to feel comfortable and relaxed about the embrace of Putin. Obama had been criticised for any sort of for not, kicking Putin's ass in Syria and that sort of thing. And then suddenly Putin was the good guy and we should be sort of cozying up. And this points to this sort of psychoanalytic point about politics of this sort, that once you have this sort of erotic attachment to a leader like Trump, they can make black seem white and white seem black. They can simply reverse the position in an instant and people will go with them. And what's happening with Putin and that sort of thing is that for a lot of these people, it's like a sort of Vichy France moment. America is seen as the American elite is seen as so weak, progressivist, third worldist. They're selling us out to immigrants. They're making us all gay marry compulsorily. They're destroying religion and all that. And over in Russia, you've got Putin, who's this strong leader who's banning homosexuality, who's decriminalizing domestic violence, and who's holding up. And then Putin, in the face of a decadent Europe and a decadent America, Putin becomes the standard bearer of the white Christian West. And so Putin is the sort of person who's holding the white ethnos of the United States in trust until they can get it back. And Trump is the means by which they get it back. So that's not much about the South Pacific. I'm sorry, I just don't know enough, but I presume that, as far as things like China and the Spratlys and the South China Sea goes, you would presume that there would be much more full-on confrontation, but then you just don't know what's going on behind the scenes of the Trump facade.
Next question, please.
Thank you. My name is David Trundle. I'm a Crikey subscriber, and I thank you for your.
As should everybody.
I thank you for your commentary there. As you've described, the Trump election is in response to a very real set of circumstances that Americans are living in particular economic decline for so many people. Do you see the possibility of anything positive coming out of his presidency? I mean, so far as well, I guess the whole country is concerned, but in particular for those people who feel themselves to have been so, left behind?
I think there's definitely positive things that may come out if they put an infrastructure program in, which, is simply partly what we on the left wanted, which is a Keynesian infrastructure program which refloats demand. Now, I think they'll do it in a sort of gangsterish way. They'll trade it off to private interests, and there'll be a whole lot of corruption and feather bedding. If they do that and nothing gets built, then there will be a real backlash against Trump. So I think they will be, in terms of their political survival, they may well actually be, sort of reviving certain parts of the United States which have simply been left to rot, and been left to rot by the Democrats as well. And that would be the first thing. The second thing is is killing the TPP, so we don't have to fight that. I mean, it's a real big relief for me, I think for other people. And I think there's no point not acknowledging that, because this is part of the collapse of simple left-right politics at the moment. This whole ensemble of left politics we had, which was Keynesian and social democratic and progressive on gender and race and those sorts of things, has collapsed. There is a lot now, a lot of people who are very liberal-minded in the US on gender and race and those sorts of things, and in the Hillary Democrats, are also pretty keen on globalisation, free trade, and pretty, snobbish, verging on chauvinistic towards the working class and the middle of the country and the poor. There's a real cultural shift going on whereby the left liberal fusion that was created in the 1960s, the one I'm talking about, is now sort of dying out through lack of use, and people don't remember it, and so there is no natural fit between those two value systems. So when you look at a lot of the sillier things said by people like Lena Dunham and people like that, these sort of celebrity liberals in the US, there's a shocking degree of just lack of comprehension of poverty and how people live and how the education system's collapsed and offers people no way out. All that sort of stuff, just a total absence of it. So in that sense, not only is there, the possibility, not only may there be these positive things, as well as a lot of very negative ones coming along, but it also offers a possibility for a reconstruction of the left, based around, what we are led to believe, that the core of things is production, and who controls production, and who decides who gets what and how and when, and you build around that progressive and liberal values. And I think that is, at the moment, what's happening and what should happen are fights on the left, this real old-fashioned struggle about saying this is what matters, and that looks like splitterish and all that sort of thing. But I think that's a necessary process and possibly a valuable one.
Okay, let's have a woman to ask a question, maybe. Okay, there's one right here. Who's got the mic?
Given what you just said about the struggles on the left.
What's your name? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Jana Adams-Tess. All right. All right. Do you see a leader, a potential leader on the left? Who could it be, and do they have any chance for 2020?
No, I mean, I don't. There's all sorts of.
Okay.
There's all sorts of people around. I mean, it sort of rack my brains at the moment. I don't think it'll be Bernie. He'll be 78, and I still really believe.
What about Elizabeth?
Well, possibly. I think, and it's the same thing with Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, where we would see huge crucial differences between, say, Tony Blair and Jeremy Corbyn, a lot of the people we're trying to appeal to see them as more similar, in the sense that both sorts of people, while they may differ hugely on economic issues, are committed to open borders, global abstract systems of morality and that sort of thing. And what's happening at the moment is that large sections of the working and middle classes are going in very nationalist, communalist, and parochial in a non-judgmental use of the term fashion. And this is an epochal shift. And I've always believed that a lot of the sort of the idea of the necessary internationalism of the working class and that sort of thing has always been something of a fiction and a projection of intellectuals onto a social class. So what I'm saying in that is that the sort of left figure who could emerge in the US and really contest the right's takeover of a lot of this stuff would have to have a fairly nationalist, in a non-pernicious way, nationalist and communalist sort of heft to them. And that's nobody at the moment. It's certainly not people like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie.
Hi, my name is Iftikhar Omar. Thanks for the speech. My question is probably looking for a little bit of hope. Can you see what sort of mistakes Trump could make to lose the massive support he has at the moment?
Well, that's true. Yes, it's very tenuous, and one of Trump's risks is that he's hugely overpromised. He's promised 4% growth, which is, I think, impossible in a late capitalist Western economy now. He's simultaneously promised protection of, entitlement funding like Social Security and Medicare, which are things you pay into through your wages and get out when you're 65, which are hitherto been threatened, but once you ring-fence them, you have a budget deficit problem. But at the same time, he's promised to get the deficit down and retire some of the $20 trillion debt, as well as expanding the military massively. So he's promised all these things which just don't add up. And the only question on that is what happens when that doesn't add up, and what are the minimum conditions that the people who supported him will accept in terms of a turnaround. My feeling, and it's not a very hopeful one in your terms you're talking about, is that a lot of people in the Midwest and these sorts of areas I was talking about, they were looking for hope too, more than they were looking for achievement, and their hope was that their economies would be revived. And they might not be pissed off if the old auto parts factory in their town wasn't replaced by another factory or another workplace that employed a lot. But if the next town over was, and people got work and things were happening, that sort of thing, that might actually be enough for them, the sign that something was moving in the right direction, and that they hadn't just been deserted and things weren't going to get worse and worse and worse. It might not take much for the Trump team to gain the sustained support of those sorts of working and middle class groups. But on the other hand, if they're just a bunch of gangsters, desperados and fantasists and they screw it up, well, then there might be a reversal. Then there might be that sort of, sudden collapse of the political romance where people do suddenly turn. It's the old thing about the old way that con men work. The trick con men say is that if you con one person at a time and they don't know other people who've been conned, they won't admit they've been conned. It's too shameful. Once there's a critical mass of people who've been conned, something turns around. That might be the model.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hi.
Your name?
My name's Philippa. I'm just wondering, so you're a member of the press. I wonder how obsessed we are with Donald Trump as a, the logic, and there's no logic to Donald Trump. So he's there's a lot of showmanship, and I wonder if we're so obsessed with thinking about what happened and is this a deeper story where in reality the guy doesn't have a lot of depth. And I think a little bit about Jimmy Carter as a one-term president and who was shut down by the politics around him, and I just wonder if we're taking it a little bit too seriously. And I don't downplay the fact that the guy is bringing in a new era of politics, etc. But it just wonder, at what point are we going to take more control of the agenda instead of letting him control the agenda? And it's quite a fascinating environment we're in. And you referred to the reality TV element of his personality. I just wonder if we're wondering what the hell happened versus and at what point will we start to take control of the agenda versus himself? And so it's probably more a bit around, my question is, are we taking him far too seriously, and at what point do we take more control and push back a little bit?
But do you mean, in terms of taking him seriously, do you mean over-interpreting the depth of the man himself? Not. I mean, the situation is serious in the sense that he controls the nuclear codes now. So you're like facts are stubborn things in that sense. I think in looking at what happened, in looking at how Trump and his team won, there is a certain amount in which it was his team, like Steve Bannon and those sorts of people, and this was your sort of classic coalition of different but overlapping interests, where suddenly these people at this right-wing website called Breitbart, who are, as I said, anti-free trade, pro-nationalist, really quasi-fascist, realised that Trump running on the basis of his ego, his narcissism, his all sorts of different things, was someone they could fuse with, and that he would recognise that he needed them as well, and that's what created this distinctive political movement and moment. That does seem to me to require a certain amount of interpretation. I mean, this is an epochal shift of class, class sections and whole sections of the population. It seems to me, I mean, there is a lot of resistance going on, and that's good. But in parallel to resistance, you need to understand how the world works in order to change it. And we clearly had a wrong picture of the world in that we all thought Hillary was going to win, and everybody had a wrong picture of the world, the pollsters and that sort of thing. Something happened, which is, something happened here, something happened with Brexit, something will happen if Marine Le Pen wins the French presidency and Geert Wilders wins the Netherlands presidency, and this is the shutdown of the Liberal Democratic era. And really, how far do you want the arc to go back? It's the 100th anniversary of the October Revolution. In a way, this might be the end of a very long arc of working class and progressive politics. Things might have changed. So I must say, I really think that some pretty fundamental interpretation is a pretty necessary thing.
Okay, who's next? Who's got the microphone? And then up the front here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your commentary.
Your name, ma'am?
My name is Anne Echo. I'm a member of the Greens. Look, there's so many contradictions in the situation that it makes it so really interesting. For instance, the whole position in places like Australia for the TPP was as much as anything democratic impulse, because there was essentially negotiations conducted in secret, and a deal that was going to be imposed willy-nilly on the Australian people, regardless of what they'd actually voted for, and which you could see quite clearly was going to be used as a stick by governments like Turnbull's and probably also Labor in order to beat back things like environmental legislation. So at one level, some of the opposition to things like that was both well-based, not so much in free trade as in a democratic impulse that says we don't control this process and we don't like the consequences and we don't oppose it. And that seems to me to speak to a lot of the things that Trump has done, that there's a genuine sense of lack of control, lack of any say in what's actually happened to people, and a consequence, there's a receptive audience to the sort of pretty simplistic things that he was saying. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, the resistance that's come in response to the ban on Muslims entering America from the 7 banned countries has been quite extraordinary. Now, I wonder, is there any connection between these things? Because that struck me as being very much an instance of what we've always seen in the United States, well, in the last 40 years anyway, a very large, middle-class, liberal-minded section, which would stand up for rights, which would stand up for the rights of foreigners included, and would certainly stand up for things like freedom of religion. So is there any crossover between that impulse to resist Trump and at the same time want to fight for democratic control of what's going on in the United States? Because that seems to me to be the hope of the future.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think one thing about the anti-democratic nature of the TPP negotiation and its neoliberal content, or its economic content, is that that's the essence of neoliberalism, isn't it? The only way to put a thing like the TPP in is by doing it in secret, because if everybody knew what was going on, it wouldn't have a chance. And, you know, this is really the long arc of neoliberalism from Chile in 1973, that the only way to get neoliberalism going was to enforce it with a gun, and then it starts to flow through in other ways. So it's the resistance, as you say, the residual, you know, the great deal of residual liberal resistance to something like the Muslim ban and that sort of stuff is allied with the desire for a democratic political process. But the crucial thing about opposition to the TPP in a lot of the heartland wasn't the way it was negotiated, it was the content. So a lot of those people would have a different sort of political ensemble, in that they wouldn't want the TPP at all, but they might be quite happy to bomb certain places which you might otherwise be sort of oppressing with the TPP, if you see what I mean. They would still be sort of America firsters or suprematists or that sort of thing. I can only think of it at the moment in terms of this class split because of the change in the nature of Western economies, where information, culture and knowledge has come to the centre of them, created a new social class which used to be a small subclass, and class contradictions have developed between that class, which many of us are members of, and which used to see itself as a small adjunct to a giant working class movement, and a working class movement which has shrunk by the very nature of the shrinking of industrial capitalism, and has also, through various processes, become gone to the right, gone to nationalism and that sort of thing. And how we then rebuild a large majority alliance which is economically progressive, economically social democratic, and offers to people the idea that they should have the power of the economy in their own hands, at the same time as you say, we must have a liberal, equal political order. It seems to me the crucial thing is that has to be thought of now as a coalition which has differences, cultural differences, differences of style, differences of emphasis, not some giant unitary alliance in which there is no substantial contradiction and every value is inherent in every other value, and I think that's why this is such an epochal moment for the left.
We've got a question down here at the end.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Guy. That's
your name too.
Really fascinating analysis. I think that we've got the sociology of what you're saying I totally agree with, but maybe I'll take a different viewpoint on the political future of it. It's basically a glass half full, glass half empty situation. I think I detect a rather pessimistic analysis on that. To me, what the Trump victory was the greatest con job in the United States history and possibly in world history. In any other presidential system in the world, he would have lost. It's only because of the undemocratic system they have in the United States that he won. He also did not win a majority of working class votes in the United States. He actually won a minority of working class votes overall. He won in the Rust Belt, and that is a reflection, as you've said, of the failure of the Democratic Party actually to
do anything,
respond to that and work on that. But I think that what we've seen in the last 2 weeks is an incredible response, and we've actually seen the largest demonstration by women in the United States history. They're saying that 4 million people marched in response to 4 million people, mostly women, marched against Trump, and we're actually probably going to see the revival of the women's liberation movement in the United States because of him. We're also going to see a revival of the Latino movement. We're seeing in Latin America already a movement of unity of the entire Latin American continent against him over the Mexican War. And we're actually seeing worldwide a response. I don't know, I think that we've got 2 sides to this whole thing. We've got the Trump ascendancy, but we've also got a massive response. And I think that there's a possibility here, a very, very big possibility for the left to actually utilise the situation to actually stage a revival. And that could occur in Australia as well, because we've got the Trump effect here. So I wonder what you think about the possibility of actually a counter-response which may be even stronger than the Trump effect. Thank you.
Okay, so Jim.
I think just a point on the nature of the American political system. I think it's not unfair when supporters of Trump say that yes, he lost the popular vote, won the Electoral College, but had the system been a majority vote, he would have campaigned in places that he lost badly, like California and New York, which he just wrote off because they always go Democrat. So I wouldn't necessarily say that in another situation he would have lost the majority vote. That is in part an effect of the fact that because there's in the last 4 weeks you only campaign in 5 or 6 states and you do it relentlessly, and Hillary didn't campaign once in Wisconsin. So that's that. The question is, the dilemma is yes, there's a massive resistance at the moment, that's one thing, I agree with that, and it's great, and it needs to be done. But the other point is that from the polling, it looks like approval for Trump's executive order on bans on Muslim countries is 8 points ahead of disapproval. So it's got substantial support in the US. And as we saw in a recent poll in Australia last year, 48% of Australians would support a ban on Muslims coming into Australia. Now that may have been a badly worded, badly run poll, but it's not an encouraging result. The really crucial thing to me seems to me, what is the left proposing as an alternative? What is the left offering? We used to offer socialism. We used to offer social democracy. That is barely on a lot of agendas. That's barely on a lot of programs. If you look at a government like the Andrews government in Victoria, which is ostensibly labelled socialist left, in the economic sphere it's neoliberal, giving away the, renting out the port for decades to a Chinese private company, the whole port of Melbourne. And on the other hand, it is socially and behaviourally coercive. Its main sort of social programs are the control of behaviour, whether it's smoking or whatever. None of it seems to be much of an offer from the left, and that was the same problem with the Democrats. What are you getting if you vote for Hillary Clinton? You're getting, as I say, we'd now be having a shit fight over the TPP. Any sort of sense that Bernie Sanders supporters would get a place in the cabinet would have been knocked on the head. They would have told us to go fuck ourselves, and we would be feeling the same thing we always do, that we just elected a bunch of left neoliberals into power. So the problem is really on the left at the moment. What is the left proposing? Of course, you have to resist in the first instance and organise this, but let's not mistake that for an alternative program, because at the moment we really don't have one.
Okay. So, Richard, just say your name. You're on, just go.
Yeah, Richard Archer, I'd just like to get you back onto the cultural front where I think you feel a bit more comfortable. The question I have is the post-truth ethic that emerged during the campaign. As we know, Trump's pretty free and loose with facts and figures, and we have this horrible phrase come out, alternative facts. I just wonder if you could make any commentary on that. My brief sort of analysis would be that there's been a general distrust or loss of faith in the major institutions in American life, and that's reflected in this post-truth phenomenon. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, there seems to be a lot going on with that, because one's first instinct is to say, well, there's always been a lot of post-truth going on from the time that, William Randolph Hearst organised the US invasion of Spanish Cuba by Teddy Roosevelt, by sort of manufacturing atrocity stories and telling Roosevelt, I'll give you the atrocities and you give me the war. And so it was done. Orwell said of the Spanish Civil War that it was the first time he noticed that the newspapers had nothing that resembled truth in them. There were, battles where none were fought, and hundreds of men died, and it went unreported. And his famous phrase, "Some things are true even though the Daily Telegraph says they're true," which works here as well as in England. But yes, there has obviously been a shift in the degree of insouciance about pretending that something is true. The whole idea that you just put out a rhetoric or a version of events has become acceptable. And I think that does actually come back to the culture class split that I'm talking about, because increasingly it seems to me that what's happened is the actual practice of knowledge and cultural production is now seen, and communication is now seen by an excluded class, the working class, whatever, as a tool of the enemy, if you like, as a tool of the other culture. I think that's one reason why, for example, climate change denialism, having been pushed back a little, is now surging forward, because we've got to the point where the actual fact of science, actual scientific reasoning, is seen as something abstract and complex, and that's what that class does. And so increasingly there is an idea of valorising the concrete, the known, the anecdotal, the immediate, the lived, the I reckon, and that sort of thing, and celebrating that as a sort of class value by some. I don't want to libel working class people who actually read the newspaper, and because there's millions of them. This is one section of a lot of people in America who've gone through a very bad education system and have come out, in many ways functionally illiterate, surrounded by pretty poor mass culture. Newspapers are absent. TV news is lobotomized, and many people only have second or third contact with actual news sources. So it's there'll be one person in a whole workplace who reads the newspaper, and it'll be USA Today, which is like a cartoon, and they'll say this thing happened. So it becomes a Chinese whispers effect. But I do think that the crucial thing about this post-truth thing is that it is part of this class war in that way, and that too is a real shift.
Okay, we've got time for one more question only, so go ahead.
Hello, thanks very much. It was an absolutely marvellous presentation.
Hold it up
I really
to
want
your
to take up with you your answer to my friend over here about the role. It's really the role of Bernie Fraser.
Bernie Fraser?
It's Bernie Sanders.
I think that you dismissed that a bit too quickly, because what Bernie has been able to do has been actually to create a movement which has really deep roots. And that movement is going to continue. It's quite different to what you've described, about the current sort of people on the streets. There's a movement being created that will not die. And I think when you said, oh, he's 70, well, I happen to be 80. And I feel and I think Bernie could well go for another 10 years, 15 years, but he's created leaders within his movement. So what do you think that he is going to do? Because he reaches out to the very people that were totally trashed by Hillary Clinton, called the basket of the poor. He must have fantastic trust in him, in the people who've actually been responding in the working class to his movement, which will grow. And he's also got the young people, and the energy that young people have got. They're not going to go away. So could you say just a bit more? It's not enough to say he's 77 and that's the end of him, because that just isn't right.
No, I didn't. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. I meant as a presidential candidate. I think there was asked. Yeah, sure. I was answering the question. I think there was implicitly about what's. I think Bernie will be at a demonstration the day he dies. And he will die in the saddle, as it were, and he's fantastic, and he has raised a movement, an insurgency that is rolling on, and has it has its own sort of a left flank to it and a centrist flank, and he has with other people around him has started that. That's great. I don't know where it will go. The thing about American politics is that, nobody predicted Obama in 2008. What did Clinton's advisors say? Obama, maybe in 2050. But after Obama came in, nobody predicted the Tea Party. America has a very dialectical process to its politics. I think, I think there's definitely a movement there. I think in terms of the appeal of someone of the sort of social democracy Bernie Sanders is projecting, I'll go back to what I said earlier. It has to be done in the American grain, and I think there's a lot more skepticism about the state, a lot more skepticism about abstract notions of right and abstract notions of political morality there than there might be elsewhere, and so the left movement that could counter Trump will have to come from within certain different traditions, which have a more of a cleave back to nationalism and self-reliance and grassroots sorts of things, and more skepticism towards the state. But then again, if we're socialists, we've had a skepticism towards the state too. We've had a long alliance with a social democratic or capitalist state, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the only way to do left politics. And I don't think it is the way we can do left politics anymore. You would always want to try and capture state power, but the idea that we can just roll in a state as social democracy, I think that's over. I think we have to start to look towards the way in which the transformative new technologies like additive 3D printing, additive manufacturing, renewable energy and those sorts of things create the possibility for post-capitalist forms of organisation within at the grassroots of the economy, which are neither part of the state nor the market. So I think a more radical leap starts to be required in that I think we should recapture the state, but I don't think you'll ever have a New Deal state or a democratic socialist state in that way.
Okay.